Denis Villeneuve has crafted something truly remarkable, a flawless and bold telling of Frank Herbert's classic novel Dune. Plainly put, root beer is one of those beverages that you either love or abhor. For those individuals who love it, root beer tastes like nothing less than distilled happiness and stirs sweet memories of carefree moments from childhood. This gorgeously epic, read our review here, is visually stunning and fueled by a wonderful script and a gorgeous score. Starring Timothee Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Jason Momoa, Dave Bautista, Josh Brolin, Oscar Isaac, Zendaya, David Dastmalchian, Javier Bardem, Stellan Skarsgard, and many more. While some people think it tastes weird, it seems that most people enjoy root beer, especially in the United States. This also means that, these days, there are countless root beer brands and the ingredients used in these soft drinks aren't uniform. Common ingredients include vanilla, licorice, nutmeg, wintergreen, and anise, but they aren't always shared. As a result, many root beer varieties can taste markedly different from one another. Considering that root beer can taste so distinct from brand to brand, it's important to know which ones you can trust. Otherwise, you'll waste a lot of time sipping subpar beverages when you could be enjoying root beer glory. It's the kind of movie that is made for IMAX in every way possible. Recently, we had the great pleasure of getting a very early look at the film as it makes its way to the Venice Film Festival. In this ranking, we've listed some brands of root beer in order from the worst of the bunch to the cream of the crop. While not every root beer brand made the cut to be on this list, we've made sure to include all of the most popular brands that you can find in restaurants and on grocery store shelves. 13. And even better, a small group of journalists had the great pleasure of sitting down with Mr. Villeneuve over Zoom to discuss the filmmaker's approach to the material, the casting of Paul Atreides, and bringing a sumptuous visual display along with a brilliant score from Hans Zimmer to life. Mug root beer. The long and storied history of mug root beer dates all the way back to the 1940s when it was known as Belfast root beer, via Thoughtco. While this variety is one of the most ubiquitous root beer brands in the United States, the unfortunate truth is that this beverage is terrible. We'll have much more Dune talk coming your way in the next few weeks before the film's October 22 release. Thank you so much for taking the time today. And congratulations on this film. It's not only the worst of all the most popular brands of root beer, but it's also one of the worst soda brands of any flavor. The problem that sinks mug root beer is its inescapable sweetness. It is just absolutely stupendous. Denis Villeneuve, thank you. Root beer is supposed to be sweet, sure, but this stuff has gone way too far in that direction. Instead of a rich, complex flavor profile, this drink tastes like carbonated sugar water. Thank you. I would like to say that I'm starting right now a long marathon, I'm starting press. And you guys finally saw the movie and you're the first ones. When the root beer first hits your taste buds, the sweetness is immediately off-putting. Tragically, the aftertaste manages to be even sweeter somehow, further intensifying the unpleasant experience. Unless you have a truly battle-hardened sweet tooth, you'll be ready to move on after only your first sip of this sugary disaster. All in all, mug root beer is totally unimaginative and is missing virtually everything that makes the best brands of root beer taste so scrumptious. I'm kicking this off with this long journey of junkets. And I'm super happy that it's with you guys. Appropriately, the bulldog on the label that serves as this brand's mascot is unimaginatively named Dog. That dog's name is almost as one note as the flavor of this root beer, but not quite. 12. I just want to say that I'm so happy. So finally you saw the movie. On the adaptation process, with the realization that there'd be multiple movies. The thing is that from the start, I knew that I'd have to focus on some specific elements because when you adapt, from source material, necessarily, you transform. Zevia. The best thing about root beer made by Zevia is the fact that it contains no calories. If you're looking to limit your caloric intake, these sugar-free drinks will help you do just that. Sadly, that's about the one and only positive thing we can say regarding Zevia's root beers. I mean, the idea was to be as close to the spirit of the book as possible, to be as close to the poetry. They have two options and both of them are really bad. I am a massive fan of the books. The brand's creamy root beer tastes like it has been watered down, while the ginger root beer has a harsh ginger-powered bite that will leave you regretting your decision to crack open a can of this stuff. Sure, ginger may be healthy, but it's only enjoyable in the right quantities. Even if you're desperate for root beer that has zero sugar and 0 calories, there are much better options on the market. Simply look for diet versions of the root beer brands at the top of this list and you'll be much happier with your selection. Not only is Zevia's sparkling water the worst of the worst, but their root beer flavors are also entirely forgettable, too. It's a book that has stayed with me for over 35 years. So it's a book that I deeply know. Don't waste your time or money on this soft drink. 11. But the more that you go into the adaptation, you realize at one point that the goal was to make a movie that will please the hardcore fans. The people that know Dune by heart, and also my mother that never read Dune. So to find that equilibrium was not easy. And first of all, that their focus was, of course, I said to my partners and screenwriters that we need to focus on Paul. As you know, Dune was written where you visit the different planets and you have all those families. Frosty root beer aesthetically, there's a lot to love about frosty root beer. But for this movie, we were mostly focused on Paul Atreides. I want the movie to be as immersive as possible and to be from the boy's point of view. The second decision that I made, I said to Eric Roth, who had to crack the beast at the beginning, I said, Eric, I'm asking you, what will be the most important element? What will be the thing you would like me to focus on as I attack the adaptation? And I said to him, women. I think that in Dune, women are very important. Not only does this beverage share a name with the legendary dessert from Wendy's, but Santa Claus, or at least a Santa Claus-like figure, also makes an appearance on the label. I think they were very important for Frank Herbert. And I think that the audience should be up front. In fact, he has a giant smile on his face even though he appears to be in the middle of a blizzard. I would love Lady Jessica to be not the main protagonist, but just be behind. Unfortunately, any jolliness you may feel while looking at that holiday scene will likely evaporate once you take a swig of this root beer. Like the aforementioned mug root beer, the first thing you'll notice is an overbearing amount of sweetness. So it was very important that the movie would be focused on Paul and the relationship with his mother, and that we try to develop Lady Jessica as much as possible. Now, the beauty of making the movie in 2 parts, that was the decision I made right at the start as well, is that there are some elements that I didn't explore in this first part that I will have the chance to explore in the second part. Dune takes all its power into details. Instead of tasting like root beer, it tastes like nothing more than liquefied candy. So that was part of the challenge. When you make a move in 2 parts, necessarily, when you do the first part, you have to know what you're going to do in the second part. I mean, it has to have the structure. It has been a dream. Once you survive the sweetness, you're met with a minty aftertaste that has an odd toothpaste-like flavor. That flavor at least offers a little bit of a reprieve from the sweet onslaught, but it too will get old after a short while. It has been mostly designed in a way that there's a lot of elements that are prepared. So I would say that I would be fairly ready to go quite quickly. How close are you if the second film is greenlit immediately? Is it ready to go into production already? Now you go quickly in a movie of that size. You still need to make sets, the costumes, we are talking about months. Even if you're buying root beer for a Christmastime get-together, ignore St. Nick on the label and pick a better brand. Your party will surely be merrier for its absence. 10. But I would be if ever the movie is greenlit sooner than later. I would say that I would be ready to shoot in 2022 for sure. Dad's Root Beer has an instantly recognizable label that features blue letters outlined in red and sitting on a yellow background. Which I would love because I am ready to go, and I would say that I would love to bring it to the screen as soon as possible. But we know the first thing, I really had time to make sure that it was exactly the way I wanted it to be. This beverage was created in the 1930s in Illinois, and it didn't take long for Dad's to become one of the most popular root beer brands in the country. To this day, you can find this particular type of root beer from coast to coast, and it's even available internationally. If you sample the aroma of this soft drink before you take a sip, you'll be thoroughly impressed. It smells like the perfect combination of licorice and vanilla with just a hint of wintergreen. And I would love to have the same feeling when I make the second part. So that would be the priority. Quality will be the priority. On the inspiration to create such impressive alien worlds. I will tell you something I said to my crew. Right at the beginning, I said, guys, I would love, please, for you to stay as much as possible away from the internet. But once Dad's root beer enters your mouth, you will likely be disappointed. That's because, while this beverage smells amazing, its flavor is underwhelming. I would love you to meditate. I would love you to dream. I would like this movie to come from inside us and not from other influences outside. I would like us to find our own path into our mind, to try to bring something. We were very arrogant. We wanted to try to bring something new there. And then there are a lot of sci-fi movies made before us. But we were really wanted. And one of the key elements was nature, to try to be as close to nature as possible. You know, to be frank, when I saw the very first Star Wars in 1977. Within a few mouthfuls, your taste buds will be bored stiff. My favorite scenes were the ones that felt the most natural, like the ones when we see the droids at the beginning. To make matters even worse, this brand of root beer also has an unsatisfactory amount of carbonation, lending it a certain flatness that causes it to be even more yawn-inducing. 9. Bundaberg root beer. Of all the root beer brands on this list, Bundaberg root beer is far and away the most unique of them all. First of all, this drink comes in what appears to be an old-fashioned medicine bottle. There was something about the strength of nature. That shouldn't be too surprising, though, because root beer was originally used as a medicine. At least you can pretend to be an old-timey apothecary as you drink this brand. I've been raised doing documentaries where nature is your most powerful ally, and I try to bring that into what I do. Strangely, I tried to do a sci-fi movie a bit like a documentary using nature as a strong ally instead of fighting against it. That's what I would say. I don't know if that is an answer to your question, but I hope. On creating the score and working with Hans Zimmer. The thing is, right from the start, Hans was very, very ambitious with the score because he was like me, it was one of his oldest dreams. I remember the first people I talked to about making this adaptation. Secondly, the bottle says you need to turn it upside down before you open it to ensure that the liquid is properly mixed. Ultimately, the taste is unlike that of any other root beer you've ever tried. While it's not hard to find Bundaberg root beer in America, it was actually created by a family-owned business in Australia back in 1960, via Bundaberg. Compared to American root beer, this stuff has almost no sweetness and instead tastes more like a combination of licorice and cough syrup. The only sweetness to be found is in the molasses-infused aftertaste. If you think that every root beer you've ever tried is too sweet, try Bundaberg root beer. I remember having dinner alone with Hans, and it was his birthday. And we were alone in a Montreal restaurant. And I said I would love you to do the Dune score and said, this is my oldest dream. Otherwise, select a brand that sits a little higher in our ranking. 8. And I will say, yes. WBC Chicago-style root beer. While WBC Chicago-style root beer has its pluses, this beverage is not quite tasty enough to be worthy of a full-throated and hearty recommendation. But he said, I'm just afraid maybe this is a very dangerous idea to tackle your oldest dream, but let's try it. And the thing is that for that, we decided right from the start that we will not use any instrument that we could recognize. Mostly, they will be like an instrument that either he will create himself or use an instrument in a new way. We were trying to distort the sound so we will not recognize where it's the source and using as much as possible the power of female voices. And that's the idea of community. That was so important to me and it was so important to Hans as well. And then I will say that right from the start of it, like in my other movies, we agreed, both of us, that the sound design and the music should be blended. On one hand, you're very likely to enjoy its strong vanilla aroma, its creamy texture, and the fact that it's made with real sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup. After a few sips, you may even think that you've found your new favorite brand of root beer. Regrettably, that opinion can change over the course of your drink. The more sips you take, the less you will enjoy the experience. Firstly, the carbonation is almost overpowering. And right at the beginning of the conception, with the music process, Hans and my sound designer worked very closely together. Even if you drink this root beer slowly, each sip will feel more and more like a bubbly, nose-invading chore. It's not like sound design was made on one side and the music, on the other. We all worked together to try to bring this specific score to life, so Hans will not be in competition with sound effects all the time. So there was a way to try to find a balance with sound design, and it was a beautiful artistic dance between sound and music. It was more designed, I will say, from the editing room with Hans Zimmer and the sound design team. In regards to exploring the villainous faction of this world throughout the story, the thing is that for me, a Sardaukar needed to be like soldiers that will have equipment designed to fight under any conditions. Second of all, there is a slightly bitter aftertaste with which you must contend. You might not pick up on it at first, sure, but eventually, the bitterness will become impossible to ignore. So they are half knights, half astronauts. That's the idea that they got these guys. Bitter root beer is nobody's idea of a good time, at least not when they're really looking for root beer. You can launch a Sardaukar army on any planet at any time, and they are ready to go in any kind of environment. All told, WBC Chicago-style root beer is okay in small doses, but you'll probably think twice before reaching out for a second bottle. 7. This was the idea of the armor with the Harkonnen. Stewart's root beer. Once upon a time, Stewart's root beer was one of the most flavorful beverages of its kind. The brand can trace its roots back to 1924, the year when founder Frank Stewart decided to make the world's finest root beer. After concocting a recipe to his liking, he opened Stewart's Drive-In and his root beer was the star of the show. While you can still find Stewart's Drive-In restaurants in the United States if you look hard enough, these days it's much easier to just buy bottles of Stewart's root beer. That's because it's now owned by the Keurig Dr. Pepper conglomerate. And I want to say that it's an exploration that we started to do to try to bring an idea of total artificiality, total disconnection from nature, a world that will be totally artificial, and totally about the exploitation of natural resources. And I will say it's thanks to my production designer Patrice Vermette who'd push to make sure that I would be happy at one point with the result. It was like a long exploration to find a balance. And I would say that it was an old dream of mine to work with a world that will use only the black color and the exploration of that. What are his plans going into the future of the cinematic take on Dune? I'm going to be very honest. Sadly, all of this means that this beverage no longer has the same distinctive flavor it must have had all those decades ago. Nowadays, the modern iteration of Stewart's root beer just tastes like generic root beer that you can find at any supermarket across the United States. It's not terrible, but it's not anything special, either. If you fondly remember Stewart's root beer from your childhood, don't succumb to nostalgia because it no longer tastes as you may remember it. 6. The thing I envision is the adaptation of two books, Dune, and Dune Messiah. That for me was, I said, okay, as a filmmaker, I know as a screenwriter, I know how to do this. Sioux City Root Beer. The first soft drink on this list that deserves a hearty recommendation is Sioux City Root Beer. It has a deep, rich flavor and enough cane sugar to keep the party rocking. The aftertaste is a little bit lacking, but otherwise, this is a high-quality root beer that's worth a try. That said, if you like Sioux City Root Beer, you will absolutely adore Sioux City Sarsaparilla. While this beverage has a tagline that claims it's the granddaddy of every other root beer, it doesn't taste much like traditional root beer. Rather, Sioux City Sarsaparilla tastes like it's made of 60% cream soda and 40% root beer. That may sound strange, but your taste buds will agree that it's yummy. Although sarsaparilla beverages have a history in the Americas dating back centuries, the FDA actually outlawed using real sarsaparilla in 1960 as the genuine stuff contains potentially carcinogenic compounds. Thankfully, there are now much safer alternatives that keep the flavor going strong without the potential poisoning risk. So I decided that we'd split the first novel in two. If you want to try the best sarsaparilla-flavored soft drink on the market today, get a bottle of Sioux City Sarsaparilla. 5. So now we have 2 or 3 movies. Those movies are very long to make. Virgil's handcrafted root beer. If you're in the mood for a complex root beer that is sure to titillate your tongue, opt for Virgil's handcrafted root beer. This brand is supercharged with more than a dozen different roots, flavors, and spices including sweet birch, nutmeg, cinnamon, and anise. So for my mental sanity, I decided to just dream about 3 movies after that because I'm a big fan of all the novels. If you find that typical root beer is too bland, this is the stuff that you need to add some real spice to your life. As the name suggests, this beverage is also created in small batches to help ensure its quality. While all root beer tastes better when it's cold, you need to make sure that Virgil's handcrafted root beer is as cold as ice before you take a sip. After that, I see where I am. If it's room temperature, this beverages can actually come off as somewhat gross, as all of the competing flavors will instantaneously overwhelm your senses. But I will say that I want to focus on the aspect of these 3 movies right now. However, that's not an issue as long as it's served up cold. Virgil's also makes a zero-sugar root beer that's an excellent alternative for drinkers who want a sugar-free treat. It tastes very similar to the original, with the main difference being a somewhat more muted aftertaste. 4. IBC Root Beer. IBC Root Beer has been a favorite among root beer aficionados since it first hit the market in 1919. By the way, I'm not dreaming about Dune Messiah, and I'm focusing on launching Dune Part 1 and hoping that there will be a Dune Part 2. And that's my main plan. And that's enough. I mean, doing the first one was by far the most challenging thing I've ever done. This brand used to be near the top spot on this list, but the truth is that it has slipped a little bit in recent years. The issue is that this soft drink has gotten sweeter and sweeter as time goes on. Today, it's still one of the top 5 best root beer brands, but we have to admit that it's not quite as awesome as it was back in the day. The best characteristic of IBC root beer is its delicious combination of vanilla and licorice flavor. The added sweetness somewhat interferes with the vanilla and licorice, but both flavors are still strong enough to cause you to grin from ear to ear. If you've never taken a sip of IBC root beer, you should do so soon. And the thing that I think that we were able to bring it to life because we all, me and the team, just did that for 2 years and a half full time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We were dreaming about Dune Part 1. That's the way I can make them. And then I can start to have a long term. If this root beer keeps getting sweeter, it could eventually be ruined as the more complex tastes get drowned in sweetness. I need to be there now and not think too much about the future. Was there any sequence that he was not able to use? Something he'd hoped to be a part of the first part? Okay. I will say something to you guys. Yeah, I have one. But right now, it's still really good, though few people know how much longer that will last. 3. There's one thing that is painful for me. Sprecher Root Beer. Sprecher Brewing Co. Its Gurney Halleck's Bolliset is a Milwaukee, Wisconsin, craft brewery that was born in the 1980s. It's something that I shot. This brewery makes a variety of beers and sodas, including the marvelous Sprecher Root Beer. It's something that exists and just was awesome, but I could not, for several reasons, was unable to put it in Part 1. Now what? The thing I changed from the book that I feel is. I don't want to go into spoilers, but I will say that there's something about the way we approach Paul's relationship with the future. Even if you have to travel a long distance to get your hands on this soft drink, it's well worth the effort. All it will take is one swig for you to be a fan for the rest of your days on this earth. 2 aspects of Sprecher Root Beer will catch your attention. First, the creaminess of this beverage makes it a joy to drink and sets it well apart from the competition. Second, the subtle yet unmistakable flavor of honey takes this root beer to the next level. His visions. Once you drink a couple of bottles of this stuff, you'll wonder why more root beer brands don't add honey to their recipe. Sprecher also makes a maple root beer that exchanges the honey for maple syrup. It tastes good and has a distinct flavor that you may still enjoy, but it's not quite as wonderful as the original honey version. 2. Barq's Root Beer. What's the best part about Barq's Root Beer? The fact that Barq's has bite, of course. That bite comes in many forms, but primarily, it's a reference to the sharp yet clean aftertaste that causes a jolt of happiness in your mouth. This root beer also has a smidgen of black licorice flavor, which adds an indisputable bite to its flavor profile. That's where I want them a bit more personal in the way. I was inspired by Frank Herbert's book, but that's where I took a bit more liberties, and I'm pretty proud of what I did there. I would say, if you are familiar with the book, there is a perfect place to separate the 2 movies. Additionally, this beverage has the optimal amount of carbonation. It's strong enough to keep things exciting, yet loving and gentle enough to make sure you continue to have fun.
Barq's Root Beer is also famous for being one of the few mass-produced root beers to have caffeine in the mix. What inspired his choice to go in a different direction than that? There was a natural point you could have ended there, but it would have made the first movie too long. If you need an extra amount of pep in your step and want to feel energized, this delicious brand of root beer is up to the task. While this brand didn't quite come in first place in this ranking, it was really close. All told, you can't go wrong with either of the top 2 choices. 1. A&W Root Beer. When you want to drink the best root beer money can buy, A&W Root Beer is what you should purchase. I didn't want to sacrifice elements. And already I was shoveling, if I may say things, elements like the character, like Fade Router. I was watching for his introduction to the second part. Its smooth flavor promises to make it a hit for people of all ages. It's complex enough to satisfy a root beer connoisseur, yet it's serene and velvety enough for even kids to enjoy it just as much. The legend of A&W Root Beer began when a man named Roy Allen sold root beer at a stand in California in 1919. But if we tried to go to that jump, the movie became monstrously long. And I was feeling that there is a limit. A few years later, Frank Wright was brought on board and the pair started opening multiple root beer places in the state. So where we end right now, I thought was the perfect way to feel that Paul had a completed arc as a character in this first part. Taking a cue from their initials, Allen and Wright named their chain A and W, and the rest is history. More than 100 years later, this root beer is still as beloved as it was when it first caught on. No matter how you drink A&W root beer, you can't go wrong. The first part is his relationship with his mother. We feel that there's something that is not a closure, but something relevant there. And to keep enough stuff for the second one, that's the way I would see it. But if you want to know, it's yes, that was not always, there was a lot that happened in the writing. If you drink it out of a can, you'll love it. It's something that I explored with Eric Roth and with John Spaihts. If you go to an A&W restaurant and drink it out of a frosty mug, you'll love it. If you have a root beer float for dessert, nothing tastes as great as mixing the ice cream with A&W root beer. John and I spend a lot of time brainstorming. This beverage is a big hit in any situation and for practically any crowd. And if I have to find that equilibrium, it was not easy, honestly. In regards to the storytelling trope called the white savior trope, in which a Caucasian person goes into a foreign land to act as a rescuer. On whether or not he felt that was something that came into mind while creating the film, it's a very important question. And it is why I thought that Dune, when I was reading it, is so relevant. It's critical of that. It's not a celebration of a savior. It's a condemnation, a criticism of that idea of a savior, of someone that will come and tell another population how to be and what to believe and try to tell them. And so it's not a condemnation, but a criticism. So it's like that's the way I feel. It's relevant, and that can be seen as contemporary. And that's what I will say about that. It's the opposite. Yeah. When it came to casting both Timothee Chalamet and Rebecca Ferguson, I just had a list, a secret list. And most of the people that you are seeing on screen were on that list. It was amazing the level of enthusiasm that the actors and actresses had with the book, with the source material. There's a lot of love for Dune out there. And it's a project that really brought a lot of passion to the actors community, I will say that. And right at the start, I remember sitting in Mary Parent's office and we were like, okay, who should play Paul? And we both said it's Timothee Chalamet. It has to be Timothy. It does. And there was no plan B. I said that earlier in an interview, I think, but there was no plan B. That was the truth. I know. I didn't say that on the day, of course, but I wanted for so many reasons. He was for me Paul Atreides. This was the incarnation, the physical incarnation of what could be the most fantastic Paul Atreides ever. The next decision was to cast his mother. And Rebecca Ferguson came to my mind because I was always mesmerized by what I was seeing on screen. She had all the qualities I was looking for as an actress. And physically, too, I felt that she looked like Timothy. There was something in her eyes, that physicality. And I truly believed that she had that regal quality, that mysterious quality that she could bring all the complexity to, all the layers. Lady Jessica is the most complex character in this story. And I wanted an actor that would be able to bring all the layers up front and play with them. And I think it's probably the most difficult part to play. So when once I found my duo, then my body relaxed, my soul relaxed, and we brought Oscar Isaac on board. Oscar fits the description of the Duke. When you read the book, you describe Oscar. And I wanted to work with Oscar for a long time. And by the way, he sent me a text message one day saying, hey, by the way, I love Dune. Was I telling you there were like these tingles? So it was like a very, I will say, exhilarating, exciting process, the casting on this movie, because there was so much enthusiasm coming from the acting side. What did he learn from the first film that may carry over into the second film? The tough task here was to introduce you guys to the world, to the ideas in this world, to the cultures, the different families, the different planets that, now once this is done, it becomes an insane playground. So it will allow me to go berserk and really create. Dune 1 is like an appetizer. Dune Part 2 is the main meal where we can have much more time. So that's what I can say. Dune Part 1 was by far my most exciting project ever. Dune Part 2 is already getting me even more excited, that's what I can say. And I don't lie right now. When it came to making this film is enjoyable for new viewers in addition to fans of the source material. That was the big challenge, my friend. That was the challenge, because, I know the book. I read the book I don't know how many times, it's just been beside my bed for the past 35 years. So it's like I had to make the movie for other people that were not familiar. So that's where I go to introduce this world without being too much didactically, that it becomes like a lesson that becomes almost like homework for the part of the audience I was trying to reach. So that's where we had to find ways that will feel respectful to the book, but kind of a little bit different. so it's all about choices and sometimes tough decisions. But it was like I would say that, again, it's not something that was done in 5 days. It took something that evolved as we wrote the film. And as I shot, and it's something that evolves as a sculpture will evolve. And for me, it was a very fascinating process. A filmmaking process that I really enjoyed from that space to explore, to make sure that I would find the right path to tell that story. But that was not the path I found very quickly. About his personal influences regarding nature, and finding the elements he appreciates in the book on his own and putting into the film. I will say the truth here, I was raised in a small village where I was in a relationship with the horizon and the St. Lawrence River. And it was like that line and that massive sky. Skies that bring humility. You know, you are so small as a human being when you have that kind of horizon around you and that the power of nature. I was raised also by a grandmother that taught me to be mesmerized in every day, in a daily way, every day, to be mesmerized by nature, by a flower, by everything. It was something that I once asked her. I said, "Grandma, you go to church. How do you pray, here?" And she said to me, "I pray every time I'm in my garden to be in relationship with the plants and nature. That's where I feel the most, the power of this. If God exists, that's where I feel this power." And that's something from when I was a kid hearing of her true, sacred relationship with nature. It's something that mesmerized me, and I became fascinated with biology. One of my favorite books is the book about the human body. I mean, that's sci-fi. When you look at just what your brain does to do that with your finger, bending his finger up and down. I mean, that's where it's biology. For me, it was one of my first, biggest loves with cinema. And at one point, I had to decide whether I would become a biologist or a filmmaker. And it was really a very important moment in my life. I just love nature. So it's not something that came from when I was a kid in my village. I think I would say. On whether or not his previous work shaped Dune, definitely. I'm the accumulation of all my movies. First of all, when I do a movie, I'm trying a new movie. I'm trying to bring something new. I'm trying to put myself in front of challenges that I think that I have never done before. I'm trying to really approach cinema, the medium, with different tools. I'm trying, on Dune as an example, it was the first time I was really shooting for IMAX. It was the first time that I was studying the use of slow motion. There were ideas, like a handheld camera that was like a lot of technical layers that I was trying to make, how can I say, my cinematic language evolve. But I'm the same guy. And so, yes, there's a strong influence, definitely from Incendie to Enemy, or even from Arrival to Blade Runner. That all the movies that I did before Dune are an accumulation of knowledge that, again, brings experiences.
That's where Dune is like a selfie of myself. How connected. Yeah, that's where I am right now. It's by far, honestly, I think it's my most personal movie. Strangely, there's something that's a connection with this movie that I never felt before. It's like it feels as if I'm so close to it. It's very warm for me. When it came to balancing his fandom to create a well-crafted feature, the thing is that it's a process, that the equilibrium was like we were trying to reach it in the screenwriting process. But I will say that it's something that has evolved through time. Even as I was shooting something that was changing elements or trying to make sure to find the most efficient and cinematic way to express complex ideas, to make them as accessible as possible. I'm sorry, my answer is a bit boring because it was just a lot of work for me through to the end. And a lot of brainstorming. And there are elements, for instance, that I feel that you cannot calculate in advance or that I would like to have the music the way we approach music in the movie as Hans Zimmer would say, is we were trying to express some of the inner journeys of that, you know. The book is very internal. Most of the book is often about two guys going into a room and starting a conversation together. And then you heard them talk. And you know what? They are thinking of each other and is like a game or a confrontation going from just knowing their stuff, you know? And so I couldn't do that with the movie. So it was all to express this inner world, of the inner world of the character of that thought process. And I use that. And signals are used in the music as well, to try to give a clue of where the character stands in this scene. It was like Hans played with the music this way. It's like trying to create music that will be about the expression of the entire journey of the characters, but all of that is something that I looked at that I did in that tool of music when I was writing the movie. It is just an example, among others, of things. Layers that I think the movie found its equilibrium at the very end when all the elements came together, and then it clicked. But before it clicked like that, it was a long journey. On what was the most difficult sequence to take on once filming began. With the movie I had made before, there were days where I was saying to myself on the schedule, I'm doing this today, it's going to be easier. But on Dune, there was no such a day. Every day had its challenges, either a very intense technical challenge, or something that dramatically was very challenging for the actors to do. It was my responsibility to bring them into that mental space. There was always something difficult to do on a daily basis. I will say that the final sequence is when Paul meets the Freeman. Why? Because Greg Fraser and I had the brilliant idea that we will not use any artificial light in the desert. It looks good on paper, but when you do try to shoot nighttime. So we used shadows. When I found I would like to make a short answer, but when we found the place where finally people will meet with the Freeman, spoiler alert, that the place looked exactly as I envisioned it when I read the book, and it was a perfect place, and a plus it was to be surrounded by cliffs, like in the descriptions in the book. That allowed us to shoot without sunlight, but just for 3 hours a day. So we had to shoot a very complex scene over the course of a week. But just 3 hours this week means that we were rehearsing all these scenes and then shooting like mad. Guys, for 3 hours, it was very intense. It was the most intense shoot of my life. It was so fun to do. I will not do that for part 2. It was too intense to prep all day and then shoot. Technically, that was very difficult to do. But it's maybe boring for you, but for us, it was not easy to do to try. Why? Because I wanted the planet to feel real. I didn't want the light to feel wrong. I didn't want to look like it was made artificially. I wanted the audience to feel that we are there. Nighttime on Arrakis with a big full moon that is bright enough so you can see, and to create that effect was not easy. Jablo recommends.